science might help explain how they behave.
During the dot-com bubble, I noticed that the behavior of traders changed very noticeably. They're normally quite a prudent lot, yuppies with a family. But during the dot-com bubble, a lot of them, both on the trading floor and all along Wall Street, became euphoric, delusional. They had racing thoughts, diminished need for sleep. They were taking far more risk than they used to. The risk had terrible risk-reward trade-offs, and they seemed hornier than usual, given the amount of pornography on their computer screens back in the days when you could have porn on your computer screens. I was only later to find out that these were clinical symptoms of mania.
They give a 14 now, 2002. Bemis is looking 39 and about 35,000 if you want to buy 10 grand.
John Coates spent 12 years on Wall Street, running his own derivatives trading desks at Goldman Sachs and at Deutsche Bank. He gave it all up to pursue a PhD at Cambridge. His specialty, neuroeconomics.
The other thing I noticed at the time was that women were relatively immune to the behavior I was seeing in the traders. So I was seeing this irrational exuberance. I thought it was chemical. It wasn't really happening with women, so there was sort of an obvious candidate for what that chemical may be. And that's how I began doing research on testosterone.
In the first study of its kind in the world, John Coates took saliva samples in a dealing room, matching the change in the traders' natural steroids with their profit and loss profile. His research took into account the risks they were taking and volatility in the markets.
What we found was that when the traders' testosterone levels were high in the morning, they made a lot more money in the afternoon than they did on days when their testosterone levels were low in the morning. And it was a very powerful effect. This was huge. I mean, this effect, if you had annualized it, would have added up to about £1 million difference in their pocket at the end of the year.
It may be just one factor among many driving traders, but what we do know from recent and current crises, the culture of risk within banks and by banks is a very powerful and very destructive force. And no one seems to know when risk becomes recklessness.
What turned out during the housing bubble is that everybody was just taking huge risk. Everybody looked like a hero, and then when it blew up, everybody lost more money than they'd made in the past 5 years, but they didn't have to give back their bonuses. If they'd been assessed over a 5-year period, I don't think they would have been taking as much risk as they were.
If you do have a situation where people believe there's no way the bank can go under, maybe because the government taxpayer is standing behind it, that encourages, it's almost a license for all sorts of risk-taking, which ought to be properly disciplined by the marketplace.
In Britain, Sir John Vickers has been trying to figure out how to protect the wider community from the rack and ruin of mischievous banking practices. Sir John is the warden of All Souls College at Oxford University. He was the former chief economist at the Bank of England and recently headed up an independent government review that recommended separating prudent traditional banking from the risky business of investment banking.
The initial reaction was a very good one. The principles behind that, in a way, are to say the simple deposit-taking, lending to individuals and small businesses through overdrafts and otherwise, that happens in the ring-fence bank. People want to do the sophisticated stuff, the complicated things, the international things. That's fine, that's up to them. But we've got to have a structure where there's no way that the taxpayer can be dragged into backstopping that if the risks go bad.
But over in Ireland, whistleblowers like Jonathan Sugarman don't have a lot of faith in regulators and their rules.
Why did you leave UniCredit?
Because we were breaking the law, and it was my name on the reports day in, day out. So, under the eyes of the law, I'm the person responsible to make sure that we kept within our speed limit. And we went way beyond our speed limit on several occasions. And the law was very clear. I could face 5 years in prison for doing that. And I just didn't want to go to prison.
He rang the alarm that his bank was in serious breach of liquidity rules, but the reaction has been painfully slow and inconclusive.
This is a grossly serious matter, and it has been reported to the financial regulator.
There's been outrage in Parliament.
And if we're not prepared to face this, and if we're not prepared to investigate it when the matters have been laid, then there is absolutely no hope for the financial system or for its reputation worldwide in this country.
But 4 years on, even after Ireland was taken to the wall by aggressive, unsustainable banking, the Irish Central Bank says it's still looking into Sugarman's claims.
And what did the police, the financial regulator, what did they do?
Effectively nothing. Nothing at all. That is like walking into a police station with a knife with blood on it and say, I've just killed someone, and you expect the police to say, well, where's the body, where's the person, what have you done? And they just say, fine, just don't do it again. And that left me dumbfounded.
Even one of history's most reckless operators has been astonished by the behaviour of banks. Nick Leeson questions their willingness to learn from their mistakes.
You know, I got myself back on the electoral roll in the UK. The first mail I got was credit card companies offering me credit cards. You know, I had an injunction against me for 100 million. I'd lost 860 million of an English bank's money, and people were willing to offer me credit cards immediately on return. So it showed you straight away that the controls and systems aren't in place that they need.
Leeson is no longer allowed to work in banking, but he found a way of taking money from international banks anyway. He advises them on how to guard against the kind of behaviour he got away with at Barings. You have to wonder if they're listening.
The weakness is in those risk management, compliance and control areas. Always has been, still is, and probably always will be.
While the rogue trader has reinvented himself as banking consultant, the whistleblower is struggling.
It took me a while to pick myself up. And then when I started looking for other positions as a risk manager, I found a lot of shut doors. It turned out that telling the truth doesn't really pay.
Over the past 12 months, Jonathan Sugarman has been writing an anonymous blog detailing his experiences at UniCredit. This is the first time he's revealed his identity. And as he continues to look for work, he can only wonder if the bank that one day takes him is playing fast and loose in a rogue system or has a rogue trader lurking in its ranks.
Here we are in 2011 with the cost of billions to UBS because a trader who had come from the back office and was familiar with the systems knew how to get around them. Because of his insider knowledge of the system, much like Nick Leeson 20 years ago, he knew how to get around that. And that is what we, the taxpayers, pay the regulators, the policemen of the banks, to make sure cannot happen and does not happen. And here we are 20 years later, and it's still happening.
Remarkably, the rogue traders didn't actually pocket any of the money they punted on the markets. It's the rest of us who are still paying the bill for their bad behaviour and for the selective blindness of their bosses.